Hello and good afternoon. Welcome. I hope that everybody enjoyed the Emerging Trends regional panel and a presentation from Andy Warren. I hope that all of you are coming over from there and that you've had just a short break to refresh your coffee and get ready for a lively discussion. I'm Shannon Sclafani. I head up ULI Michigan. And I am so excited today to continue this discussion of emerging trends in real estate with a great group of local professionals from the state of Michigan to give you some of their thoughts on what they heard this morning from both the national and regional perspective, to give you some ideas on whether or not that actually jives with what they have been seeing and experiencing, and to give you some thoughts on what's going to happen in 2021. I don't think anybody could have predicted 2020, but we're going to see how things roll into 2021. So with that, I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to quickly introduce themselves, give you an idea of the type of work that they do and what they've been seeing, and then we will jump into a great discussion. Let's start off with Derek.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you've had a great morning thus far. My name is Derek Edwards. I am with Invest Detroit. Invest Detroit is a community development financial institution headquartered here in downtown Detroit. We primarily focus on the economic development of the city of Detroit proper, starting our mission in greater downtown Detroit, and now doing quite a bit of work into our neighborhoods. We basically service and provide, resources in three specific areas, all basically focusing on economic redevelopment and improving the tax base of the city. But in our first area, we are focused on real estate, where we are providing gap capital in spaces for the reactivation of vacant, blighted, functionally obsolete spaces to bring them back online for useful activation with be it market rate housing and commercial spaces, ground floor retail to drive small business retail to drive density and traffic in those spaces, primarily in the neighborhoods right now, as I said. And then the second side of our house does a lot of work in the commercial and industrial space, as well as in small business, where we're focusing on, entrepreneurial opportunities in the city of Detroit for our minority entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, immigrant entrepreneurs, hopefully giving them opportunities to work in those spaces that are being revitalized, and some ground floor opportunities to grow businesses, as well as create jobs focused on Detroiters. The whole goal is, of course, making this an inclusive and inclusive revitalization effort across the board. But all those activities in real estate, small business, and commercial and industrial are focused heavily on obviously the goal of creating some improved tax base for the city. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for that brief introduction, Derek, and welcome to the panel. Thanks for joining us. Up next, Hanna Schulze, how would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I am here representing an organization called People First Economy. We are headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but we do work with well over 1,000 different small businesses currently across the state of Michigan. Primary body of work for us in normal times and also this year is to support locally owned businesses to the West Michigan area, and also help businesses to implement sustainable environmental and social practices so that they can continue to grow their business resiliently, sustainably, and make positive environmental and social impacts in the community that they serve. So today, I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about some of the trends that we've been seeing within the local small business, micro business community throughout 2020, and how businesses have continued to be resilient. Some of the ways that we as an organization have supported businesses as different financial products have become available for businesses to stabilize through COVID when they had unstable revenues and kind of uncertainty. What we've done to help create relationships between business sectors. So a lot of our businesses that we work with that really help our main streets stay resilient are restaurant, retail, lifestyle type businesses. These businesses tend to be owned by a higher proportion of women and minorities also, so help to provide wealth opportunities for more diverse communities of individuals. And it's very important that these kind of cultural hubs are able to be resilient through challenging years like the one we're seeing now. So creating, using our network to create connections for those micro local businesses to service providers like law firms, CPA firms, banks and other local institutions that can help those businesses navigate some of the more challenging financial situations that we found ourselves in this year has been something that we focus quite heavily on. We also have been working towards helping businesses across the state institutionalize both environmental and socially impactful practices so that when they're dealing with staffing issues, workforce issues, making sure that they're meeting the needs of their employees and the community they're serving, as well as stewarding the environment in a responsible and resilient way is really important for the overall sustainability of business corridors and cities across the state. So that's the body of work that we do. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Up next, we've got Cari Easterday with Midtown Detroit and Larson Realty Group.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for letting me participate this morning. As Shannon said, Cari Easterday with Midtown Detroit Inc. and Larson Realty Group. Midtown Detroit Inc., for those that don't know, is a community development organization focused in Detroit. We cover 3 sort of sub-districts, our original boundary of Midtown, Techtown, and now we go up to New Center. With my role with Larson, Larson Realty Group's a private developer, been around for a number of years, focused on traditional private development and pretty much all aspects of the industry in Southeast Michigan. It's, one of the things that has been pretty remarkable that I've seen through our work at Midtown. It's been, as you all know, a challenging year. But a lot of the work that we do is directly connecting with our small businesses. We have over 150 small businesses that we work with almost on a daily basis. One of the things that I think was very telling early on in the pandemic as to the response that we received for the community, from the foundation community and some of our other partners is the ability to deploy funds very quickly in the form of grants to help support those businesses over the course of sort of the last 6 months. We've rolled out, as of today, about $1.2 million in direct support to our small businesses. We also focus at Midtown and plays into the role that I have with Larson a lot on working with developers and being a developer ourselves. So we've had a lot of interesting discussions and helping developers navigate lending situations, working with the various CDFIs like Invest Detroit, not only with the developers and sort of restructuring, debt and deference, but also how that then trickles down to ultimately the end users. And in a lot of cases, the hardest hit being those small businesses. I also do some side consulting because apparently being the CFO for two organizations isn't enough for me. So I'm one of the things that's kind of been the most exciting in the midst of everything we've going through is I'm actually working on a transaction in Port Huron. I would tell you back in May, I didn't think that we'd be closing a real estate development project, but we're scheduled to close in 3 weeks. And so that's been sort of a breath of fresh air and something to be more focused in a positive way.
Thanks so much for that, Cari, and congratulations on that. Up next, we are lucky to have Ms. Jen Rigterink with us.
Afternoon, thank you. I'm Jen Rigterink with the Michigan Municipal League. We are a member-based organization representing all 500 plus cities, villages, and a handful of townships across the state. I'm part of our state and federal affairs team, and I handle legislative and policy issues around economic development, land use, so planning and zoning, and municipal service issues. So I'm very excited to participate today. I love doing these panels because I always learn so much from the panels that I'm on from the other panelists. So interested to hear the questions and get it talking here.
Thanks so much, Jen. So the first thing that I wanted to sort of get a gauge on is your thoughts on how the impacts of 2020 are going to translate into 2021. Are we still in a reactive environment? Are we at a place where we can start to be more strategic about the way that we're thinking? I'll start with you, Cari, on that.
Hey, wait, wasn't I supposed to be third on this question? I think that we have spent a lot of time learning how to adjust to whatever this new normal is the last 8 months. I don't know that I think we're necessarily in an environment, at least from my perspective, where we can necessarily be short-term strategic. I think there are still a lot of sort of unknowns. I do think that'll start to play out in first, second quarter of 2021. And I think we need to see some from the market perspective, some stabilization as we come out of this public health issue. I do think the positive thing that we have is, going into this, fundamentally, we had strong economic conditions. We had our challenges, specifically, the challenges in moving projects forwards, gap financing, increasing construction costs. But I do think that we've done a very good job of creating a stronger market. So I think that as we come out of this, I think we're going to see the market respond positively. But I think it's hard to strategically plan with so many unknowns. So for example, what's going to happen with the residential market? Are we going to see what we've sort of reactionary saw shift to people leaving the city? And does that become a permanent shift, or do people rebound as they become more comfortable? Do we really see the impact? I mean, one of the things that I sort of disagree with a lot of folks on is this idea that we're going to become a society of work from home people. I think that, that's going to work for some companies, and maybe it's a different flexible workplace, but I don't buy into the office market's going to, significantly increase. I think people need people. People need collaboration. They need to be able to mentor people. They need to help them develop with an organization. And that's really hard to do in a work from home environment. Inspiration. How do you gauge, how do you develop long-term inspiration among your staff in an environment where you're isolated in a basement, if that's where your office is? I just think that I think the office market is going to take a little time to come back. But I also think that what this pandemic has taught us is that this idea of shrinking office space and putting people on top of each other and everybody gets a tiny cube is going to change. So, people are going to want more space. They're going to want more private space versus, so I think we're going to see a shift in the way office looks, but I do think that that's going to settle down. I think the commercial, the retail, ground floor retail, I think that's the one place that's going to be very hard to predict. Originally, in April and May, the statistics people were talking about were 20 to 30 loss of small businesses. I think, now they're saying 40 to 50%. So, I think we're going to see a lot of attrition and turnover. And I think that is going to be one of the things that we're going to struggle with for years to come. rebuilding or stabilizing. You know, we've had a lot of businesses that pivoted and done a great job, but I think there are going to be some that they're not going to survive. And from a real estate perspective, it's going to take time to recirculate that space.
Thanks, Cari. I think that it would be great to hear Hanna expand on the small business aspect.
Thank
How
you.
are we feeling about sort of reactionary versus strategic planning for small business owners and entrepreneurs right now?
Yeah, I would approach this question from a couple of different directions. One, I think Carrie's absolutely right, and I think we've mentioned this a couple of times already. Is the short term versus the long term strategic planning of maintaining a mindset of flexibility and being able to pivot maybe a business model, or being able to react to a consumer base that's maybe lacking confidence as the market sort of fluctuates. And we have certainly seen that. And there are businesses that, have the resources or have the intellectual, social, financial capital to react in those ways. And then we, of course, as we're looking at the attrition of businesses, and as we're looking at the business owners and communities that are suffering business loss. We know that there's greater loss in communities of color, greater loss in communities that don't have access to resources as readily as others. And so something that I'd like to mention, a lot of the work that we've had the opportunity to do over the years has been following trends that we're looking towards, 2025 and beyond, following trends around, what is the workforce makeup? What is the consumption pattern of, as we kind of shift generationally and different generations have access to wealth and have access to business ownership and resources of that nature. And a statistic that I think is interesting is this 87% of the workforce by 2025 is set to be made up of millennials and Gen Z, which, if we think about the consumptive patterns of millennials and Gen Z, if we think about the types of working conditions that this younger generation is interested in, we're looking at talent attraction that is going to look a little bit different than it has in the past. So we're talking about businesses that are signaling their values, businesses that are prioritizing flexibility for their employees, whether it's working from home or not working from home, whether it's a young parents or individuals that want to share their talents with a company that it kind of shares their values. And from the consumer spending index standpoint as well, we're seeing similar trends in these younger generations of how they want to spend their money, the money that they do have. And so I think we've already been following those trends in that direction. And I think, this year, between the public health crisis, the economic crisis, social unrest back in the summer, I think we're seeing kind of a little bit of a quickening, I guess, of this trend as we look forward into this next couple of years. And so I think we're hoping to see kind of an emphasis on the interdependence of businesses and communities, whether it's neighborhood developments, residential, commercial developments, as well as our small business corridors, our cities, our municipalities, and showing the interdependence of things like supply chain interruption. When we saw supply chain interruption early on in the pandemic, a more localized supply chain was more resilient in that moment. Business owners who had relationships with their banks and their financial experts were able to access some payroll protection loans more quickly than those who work with multinationals who don't have that kind of personal relationship. So sort of taking it back to where we know there is resilience in certain practices. I really do feel that we've seen the merit of that over the course of this year as we've met with struggles. And there's also been, incredible amount of uncovering of some of the systemic racism and issues that we've seen and we've known existed. But this year has really kind of exacerbated those problems. And so I think it's going to be harder to ignore and easier for those of us on the ground doing the work to address real change in those areas.
Thank you, Hannah. That's so true. It in a lot of ways, it sort of opened the door for a lot of those conversations about the necessary changes. Derek, how are you feeling about sort of the transition to 2021? I mean, you deal a lot with both the lending side and some of that, small business assistance and sort of gap financing.
Yeah, I think, to echo some of the sentiments that have already been laid by Cari and Hanna, I think that what we're going to see is a lot of kind of adaptive behavior, and I kind of, it's funny, I look at myself and then sometimes I forget how long I've been doing this, but, I remember year 2000 and there was, the whole fear of what would happen then. And then there was an adaptation by most to technology and the awareness of technology. And then of course, 2010, 28 through 2008, rather through 2012, there was an adaptation there with regard to finances and a better awareness by, individual entrepreneurs of things they had to be aware of as they were growing. I think we're going to see that same thing here. I agree with Cari. There won't be this exodus or mass change in the way people do business, because I think there's a lot of value that they get from that collaboration and being in the same spaces. But I think that's very essential that we still have that component of everyday life, business life, because those small businesses depend on the reoccupation of those spaces to be able to survive. They need folks to come back into those spaces and enjoy those collaborative environments, but also walk out of their offices and go to the food and beverage operations, to go to the after work outlets, to go to the recreational outlets. And I think people crave that. They're wanting to get out now, though it's not safe, and so we definitely don't encourage that. But they will want to get back into those places. Now, it will take some time, I agree, because there's that safety factor and people have to get comfortable that, the appropriate safety measures are being taken. But I do think we'll get there. And I think that I've seen the entrepreneurs not only find very innovative ways to continue to engage with their clientele while they're remote, utilizing social media, direct electronic mail, all different types of ways of delivering their products to folks to keep them engaged and keep their awareness that they're still there going. There is going to be, still some fallout, and unfortunately, I think that not everyone is going to survive. That's the reality. But I do think that there is really a strong willingness to fight for it all. And I think that I see that those folks are really coming up with those ideas. As I say, necessity is the mother of invention. So, people are coming up with those innovative ways to continue to do business. Obviously, the longer this goes, it gets tougher and tougher to make it through. But, I think that, the things we've done here within our organization and in collaboration with the other entities around town have given a little bit of runway here to hopefully provide some additional support to folks and give them that little breath of life they need to kind of continue till we see the other side. And I think that folks are starting to feel a little bit better, given that there's the announcements with treatments and vaccines. So still very optimistic, but no.
I think Derek froze up on us, but it sounded like he was sort of closing out his remarks.
A lot of work to do, and it's going to be a tough road.
All right.
I'm sorry, am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Thanks so much, Derek. It's interesting. You started off your comments using the word adaptive, and I feel like based on all of your comments, that's probably where we are right now. We're somewhere between reactive and strategic. We're at sort of an adaptive phase. Mm-hmm. But speaking of strategic, Jen, can you talk to us a little bit about the different policies that you're seeing kind of coming through? I know we're sort of, are we in a lame duck or heading into a lame duck right now? And what sort of policies are we sort of seeing as we go into 2021?
Yeah, we're definitely in silly season. Today is the first day, and we'll have up to the next, up to 9 days, 3 this week, next week, and the following week potentially. But it's changing every day of, the House is doing session this week. The Senate's only doing session on Thursday. They're doing committees, but so that's changing. We don't have a lot of time left here to get things done. And every day we're hearing of new COVID cases in the legislature too. So that's impacting. But we're definitely in lame duck. It's going to be a little bit of a wild ride here. But before I jump into the policy part of that, I just wanted to comment on, 2020 translating into 2021 when it comes to the local government perspective. I agree with, Cari said something early on about, we've been coming out of strong economic conditions. And that's true, but that doesn't necessarily translate to strong economic conditions for municipalities. During the recession, 2008, 2009, 10, our municipalities fall with the economy, but they are not allowed to regain or rebound as the economy starts to come back because of Proposal A and Headley restrictions. And so while, the economy could start to rebound, many of our municipalities are still just getting back to, say, 2010 levels when it comes to property values, yet they're delivering 2020 services and the cost of services to 2020. And so, in policy, how does that translate? We need to be looking at what are some other local economic development tools we can give municipalities to engage in these deals. Right now, tax increment financing is one of the main sources, and tax abatements. Well, when you don't have the actual taxes to be able to give those up, tax abatements go out the door, and those a lot of times are an easy go-to. Just freeze our property taxes or, abate them outright. Well, that may be cutting a cop or, a firefighter or reducing other, services. People want their garbage picked up. They want their, snow removed, and they want public safety to show up in times of emergency. And so a lot of those factors play into, we're expecting 2021 to kind of keep going at this rate, but then 2022, 2023, we're expecting to nosedive again. So we're actively working with the legislature right now on trying to do some fixes to Headley and Proposal A to allow locals to, again, rebound with the economy, at least at the rate of inflation. And so that impacts, looking at incentives and policies going forward. I think everybody in this Zoom could probably agree the tools when it comes to incentives for development projects need to be reevaluated. There are a lot of projects out there that are having a hard time getting done because the existing tools don't work. And so now you're trying to fit square pegs in round holes, trying to make your project work to an incentive when really it should be the other way around. The league is participating in a housing coalition that's made up of the Home Builders Association and some of the regional members, some of the different housing groups out there, really looking at what kind of policies in starting next term, could we start introducing and working on. Now, again, a lot of times the easy ones to throw out there are tax abatements, property tax stuff. So the league is really, and other local government groups are really challenging that group to look at what are some other incentives that we can do that doesn't involve property taxes. How might we look at an incentive to start looking at taking Class B office space and turning it into residential if there's not going to be the need for office going forward that there currently is. But definitely agree with some of the other panelists talking about, we think people are going to crave wanting to get back and having that connection in public spaces. So how do municipalities work with their business owners on, communicating, a safety, it's safe to return when it is safe to return, but how do they work together and communicate how to safely engage in public spaces again as well?
Thank you so much for that, Jen. Hannah, you mentioned the word accelerate, so that we're working in sort of an accelerated environment right now. I'm curious if you think that these changes that are happening right now, even if they're happening at an accelerated pace, are they things that were long overdue, or are they just pandemic response related?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think, I think that I would say a little bit of both. I think on one hand, I should say, we have been following certain trends and statistics for, we had a set of data in 2008, we had a set of data in 2012, at least since I've been working with this organization, and there's, lots of data to support this throughout many economic sort of waves, recessions, et cetera, over the years. But we have data that supports that certain practices in business stabilize businesses and help them be more resilient through the down times, through uncertainty in the market, through uncertainty in consumption patterns, et cetera, and so forth. And so to that point, some of this is overdue. I think there have been times when, when we are in what outwardly seems to be a stable economic place as a country, we tend to, especially leadership, governments tend to kind of get comfortable and say, we're doing well, and this is working. And I think, we all know that it works for some and it doesn't work for others. And so to be able to kind of expose, in this moment of where everybody's kind of feeling the instability, to be able to kind of expose the gaps that are present all the time, but when there is stability at the highest levels of the market, we don't necessarily see those gaps until we get down to kind of very, very specific. So in that way, I think some of these changes are overdue, and I think we're seeing urgency. Maybe would be a better term than kind of speeding it up, but there's an urgency of, okay, oh yeah, we're seeing where these gaps are, we're seeing where we need to focus, and we are seeing where some of these principles that we have been working into the narrative for a number of years are holding true through this, and helping stabilize workforce, helping to provide flexibility, helping to provide childcare, other things that businesses have always kind of maybe or have been more thought of as extras or perks, or, oh wow, this company is doing all of this, what an amazing forward thinking kind of thing, which is true. But in moments like this, that's really what has helped save these businesses, a lot of these businesses, and stabilize businesses, and helped hold on to and provide meaningful jobs for folks who need them right now. So so I think in that way, overdue, but there's also a kind of this additional sense of urgency in the space that I'm hoping that we kind of leverage into some real substantial change at a policy level too. Is that's where real long-term change happens, I think, is when we start writing these things into policy. And I think it's important too, when we're talking about incentives and other things like that, to keep that in mind. What sorts of incentives could help business owners, refocus some of their resources into implementing some of these practices, so that they're not as worried about, or so that they can come out from under the concern of paying rent every month, and start thinking more strategically about what they're putting back into the community, what types of jobs they're creating, what types of impact they're having on their community, whether it's a small bakery, brewery, or a small manufacturer. Any of the sectors are employers. Over 50%. Gosh, I'm trying to remember the actual stat, so apologies. I'm sure it lives somewhere, but I believe I heard over 50% of the workforce in Michigan is with small business. And that's a substantial, that's outside of some of those huge employers that, have kind of a stable stable workforce, but we have a huge amount of our Michiganders that are employed by small business. So it's really important to empower then those small businesses to do what they can to create meaningful positions and stable positions for our communities.
Thanks, Hannah. Jen, Hannah sort of pointed to policy for a minute. I'm curious if from your municipalities and what you're seeing sort of running through the legislature, are these things that, has this opened up an opportunity to get some things that have been sort of on the back burner through, or are we still in sort of this emergency response mode?
I think right now in lame duck, you're going to see emergency response mode. The one thing that we do expect to make it through is the reinstatement of the state historic tax credit. There was an appropriation put in the budget specifically for, if that makes it through, a $5 million appropriation. So we think that one will make it through, because that takes out all the folks that were worried about the fiscal impact, the unknown fiscal impact. The bill's capped at 5 million. So that's one thing we'll see going forward. But, you know, a lot of folks, the good jobs for Michigan incentive expired at the end of December last year. There hasn't been a ton of activity on expanding that right now, because I think people are asking, okay, should we expand that, or should we rework it a little bit? And so those are discussions. I think coming into next term, we're going to start to see a lot of discussion around housing. That's one thing that legislators on both sides of the aisle, urban and rural, are starting to talk about more and more, because they're finally acknowledging that workforce affordable housing is an issue in their district. And so this is where you start to shake out the, you know, are we taxing people more? How does this all compute to actually make this happen? And I mean, at the League, we actually think that if we made some other structural changes, we probably would be able to lower property taxes going forward. But because the taxing system, the way in Michigan and it's built, property taxes is really local government's one and only in revenue sharing, which is all based on appropriation and always gets cut to balance the, you know, the state's budget on the backs of locals. But, you know, if we could look at the system overall, which, let's be honest, that's a huge lift. But there's no time better than now to start going down that path and at least talking about it. And a lot of times, you know, I've been involved in a lot of conversations. You get these different stakeholder groups together, and everybody is very passionate about doing something different. And I think we have a real opportunity now to have a couple people step up and take the lead and just take ownership of it. And if we do that and we get some folks who are really wanting to take ownership of it, we can see something happen. We need to stop having people in the room that are looking to be able to administer a grant and get money back for administering the grants. I know that's important, but that's not structural change to the system. And we need to look at incentives and around, you know, what Hannah's talking with. The League has a new initiative. It's kind of our evolution of placemaking called Community Wealth Building. And we are really focused on how do we help our municipalities in their local policies that is, you know, raising the tide. Sorry to use a Snyder, you know, but really, how are we're raising all boats? And, you know, how does that development project in that neighborhood either employ locals? How does it look at maybe putting money into a public space, something that the community actually is going to enjoy or benefit from long term, not just the individual doing the project and then walking away from it?
That's great. Thanks for that. Derek, on sort of the same lines, you know, Invest Detroit has been administering or acting as sort of the fiduciary for the Strategic Neighborhood Fund for, you know, a couple of years now. So you've been able to do some different things with that over the last year. Are those things that were sort of dreamt up because of the pandemic, or are those things that are that, you know, everybody had sort of wanted to be able to use those dollars for, this has created the opportunity to do that?
So we have done some really unique projects and come up with some really some may say crazy structures to get things done, but they've turned out and helped some really good catalytic projects get across the finish line. I think most of our most of the tools in our toolbox were not necessarily in anticipation of the pandemic, but just knowing that the challenges existed for us to do a lot of the neighborhood redevelopment. But what we've been able to do because of that is to be a lot more flexible on these projects and provide some flexibility, not only to the direct project itself, but down as it filters down to like the street level ground floor entrepreneurs in those retail spaces. Such things as being able to be flexible on our loan deferment payments and that sort of thing that would then give them some ability to have some working capital because that strategic neighborhood fund debt is gap funding and it's non-serviceable debt. There's been some ability to kind of figure out ways to work beyond that to give the property owners, the landlords, some flexibility so that they could offer those relief to those entrepreneurs. And so I think that we can continue to do that. I mean, I think that's at the core of what our organization does, and really what CDFIs do is trying to provide that flexible, more patient and compassionate capital source. And I think that's going to be obviously going to continue to be necessary in our space. But I think that this time has also to kind of reflect back on one of the answers I think Hanna was giving was it's actually provided a little bit of a magnifying glass on some of the challenges that we have as resource providers in the space. Not that we all don't have good intentions, we do. I think that what this time has brought upon us is the realization that there's a lot more coordination that needs to happen among us. We have a number of different tools and they're all great tools, but if we're not rowing the boat in the same direction, so to speak, we're not really having the impact across the board that we need to, and really identifying what are true gaps where there aren't tools to match so that we can adapt or create new tools for that. So I think that this time has really helped us to focus on finding that and finding the common threads amongst our organizations so that we can provide those resources.
I couldn't agree with you more about sort of this expanded coordinated effort. We tend to operate in silos and everybody tries to sort of seize a problem. What can we do or I do today to help fix that problem? And so this coordinated effort is greater than I've seen in the last 15 years.
Absolutely.
Cari, do you have additional thoughts on this?
I do, of course I do. I think one of the challenges, and totally appreciate the comments from the municipality perspective and the discussion about sort of the tools in the toolbox. I mean, the challenge is it's not just about the tools. It's about, and more microscopic when you start to look into somewhere like Detroit or different urban markets where you have similar conditions, where we're trying to build density, we're trying to build wealth. And the challenge is and we've fought this for years. I mean, I've been doing development in the city of Detroit since 1998. And it's always this back and forth, construction costs go up, the gap gets bigger, the incentives get less, take away this, do that. I mean, and it's not just the neighborhoods. I mean, you can't get a deal without every, tool in the box in Midtown or downtown. So fundamentally, as we look to solutions, we've got to look at all aspects. I mean, addressing incentives and addressing things like, looking at a new structure for property tax abatement is really important long-term, but you start to take those tools off the shelf and then you have no development. Then you're not building density, you're not building wealth, you're not building the markets, whether it's in a neighborhood or in a district or something. So it's a challenging issue. Taxes are a huge issue in the city of Detroit. The average millage in the core is about 87 mills. Without that incentive, there is absolutely no ability to get a project done because you're not getting enough rents to support even paying your tax bills, let alone your debt service and your operating. So I agree 100%. Fundamentally, we need to relook at this, but we need to do it in a way that still encourages development. It still encourages developers to be responsible to their local community and be able to make the kind of commitments that we all work so hard to do. I can tell you personally, the project that we did, Eric and I at Larson at the corner, we made a commitment early on. 60% of our commercial is focused at half market rate to local Detroit residents or existing businesses. If we didn't have an incentive on the operating side, there's no way we could have done it. Even, we had $25 million of new markets. We have a TIF. We had all the tools in the toolbox. But, $100,000 tax bill versus a $450,000 tax bill, that differential. So I just get clearly passionate when we start saying, and I agree with Jennifer, we need a solution, but we got to address it all. And we've got to figure out how to, specifically in Detroit, I'm seeing the same issue in the work I'm doing in Port Huron. We have the same challenge with property taxes as our Renaissance zone burned off in Warren. We got to fundamentally make taxes work for the municipalities, but affordable for the end users and the ability to provide those services. And I think it's something that needs to be focused on and dealt with. But we've got to be careful not to shift in a way that discourages people from making an investment. Did I use my hands enough on that one?
Always good points. I'm gonna throw out a question here that one, I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, feel free to type them into the Zoom and I will make sure that we get those to our panelists. But Derek, I'm going to start with you. What do we and don't know about 2021?
Wow, what do we and don't know? So this is going to sound crazy, but I think folks will understand. We don't know what we don't know. I think that we're all trying to get to, even if it's the temporary new norm, trying to figure out what the temporary new norm is. And unfortunately, I think the ground below us is not stable enough that we can even figure out what that is at this point. And hopefully, on the horizon, we can determine what that is. But I think that we're going to have to stay light on our feet with being able to react and be flexible with the way the cards are dealt at the time. That's again, that's the job of us as CDFIs and the other folks in the small business ecosystem to try to find ways to have that flexibility and that patient capital. We'll continue to try to figure out, how the patterns and the trends of way things are going. For example, our portfolio does have a lot of food and beverage. We have quite a few recreational types of businesses and gyms and cycle studios. And so for those types of businesses, really understanding what that gathering pattern is going to be for people here in the short run, as well as in the long run, is going to be a very valuable piece of information for us to be able to structure around and support those entities. But again, we don't know what we don't know. And those, for example, now as you take like the recreational facilities, not only now are we kind of in a more restricted environment given the peaks in the virus, but we also have hit a seasonal period, right? And so for those recreational businesses, it would be times where people would be going back in, they'd be signing up for membership so that they can keep their exercise routines going. That's not happening. Our food and beverage operations were, we were all hopeful for a little bit longer, warmer season so that they could find ways to take advantage of outdoor dining and continue to try to hopefully supplement at least some of what they're lost from being able to have folks indoors. So we're going to be trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think, unfortunately, it's just going to be revealing itself as it goes. But I think what we do know is that we're going to have to be innovative, and we're going to have to be, again, quick thinkers, and figure these things out. I wish it was a more, firm answer, but I think with a lack of a real true timeline, and a real understanding of how hopefully the pandemic situation starts to burn off, we're still just kind of in that reactionary mode. So that, being reactionary, that's what we do now.
Jen, what don't we know and what do we know about 2021?
Well, I can't agree more with Derek. We don't know what we don't know. We do know there's a lot of unknowns still out there, and this is my magic 8-ball that I shake regularly when it comes to things that may or may not happen in the legislature. It's actually pretty accurate, believe it or not, especially when it tells me to ask again later. But I think what we're going to see, at least on municipals, is we've had so many of our members who expedited sidewalk permits, did things to allow outdoor dining. There's no reason that they should reinstitute the hoops that somebody maybe had to go through. So looking at where are other processes through zoning and permitting that they can cut the fat, and where can they, making these things to help their businesses who are, let's face it, that's the fabric of your downtown. So one, we'll see a lot more of that going forward, and still encouraging to help folks look at their processes and their permitting practices, and doing things online, not having to, drop off all the paperwork, being able to submit it online and things like that. We are going to continue to reach out and work with Cari. I need you to come to Lansing and use that passion to talk about municipal finance. We need folks in the private sector to help, really push for sustainable funding to local government. So giving the tax abatements out, because we agree those can't go away. Those are incentives that are needed for projects, but we need to have that sustainable revenue sharing funding to offer for services, so that tax abatements are an easy, not easy, but are a way of being fiscally responsible still in building the economy locally. So we really need folks, both sides, in working together, like workforce housing. That's an issue for our members. That's an issue for businesses. And so really continuing private and public partnerships. And then, we're going to throw all kinds of policy at the wall next year and see what sticks. There's some low hanging fruit, and then there's going to be other things that take longer to do, but more and more, we think, those people, the local government, you're closest to the people that you're interacting with, as Hanna talked about, the supply chains, those places that weren't hit as hard, they're all hit hard, but not are recovering, are those where locally, they're more interconnected. And so we want to encourage and keep seeing that. And I think we're going to see a return to the centers and building those smaller regional hubs. And that's just going to make the state stronger overall going forward.
Thanks, Jen. Cari is not sitting at her desk, but I happen to know that she also has a magic 8-ball at her desk.
I do. We use it, but actually it broke. So I'm not sure what that says. See, when I went to grab it the other day or a couple weeks ago, and it was broke. So I'm pretty sure that's doom and gloom for us.
Future unclear.
I think I echo the same thing that both Jen and Derek have said. I think the things that I feel like we do know is that all these businesses, all these individuals have more need than we can support. And we've got a tough road ahead as a community, not only is coming out of the pandemic, but how do we support these businesses? I know a lot of the work that we do here, what keeps me up at night is, where can we find more money to help our small businesses? Like I said, we've put out about 1.2 million in just grants. We have, much like Hanna has done, we send out an email blast anytime anything is potentially in their, bailiwick of funding. So we keep them informed. We handheld a lot of our businesses through the PPP program. So I think that, it's that is, what we know is there's demand for additional support. What we don't know is how that's going to come out and when that's going to come out. And is it going to come out in time for it to save those that are really been so hard hit? You know, with the real estate hat on, I think that, you know, that trickles into how does that impact the real estate projects that are in operations? What, you know, what happens when the moratoriums on evictions get lifted? You know, the feedback I've gotten is it's been relatively stable in some of, you know, in a lot of our housing, but you've got a lot of workforce housing and affordable housing projects where it hasn't maybe been as stable. And so focusing on how we help those individuals and balance the fact that, you know, those projects also have debt service to pay. I mean, that's the biggest challenge here because nobody did this. This wasn't, you know, poor lending practices. This wasn't an economic situation. This was a public health issue. And so, and I don't know the answer to that. And that's probably the thing that keeps me up all the time.
Yeah. Hanna, anything to add?
You know, I think I would like to echo, Jen mentioned this earlier, but I just like to echo that I also am hopeful that all of the efficiencies created and all the creativity that some of our organizers, you know, I feel those of us on this call and maybe in the audience, you know, there's a privilege in being in a position like mine, where I don't own a business. It's my business to help businesses through this challenging moment. And so I have the freedom, and my team, we have the freedom to be creative and try to find these opportunities because we have the creative space in our brains. So we're not trying to run a business every day. So I'm also hopeful that these bureaucratic efficiencies and creative ordinances and other things are going to stick around for the long term, because I do think that they create more vibrant spaces when there are people to fill those spaces. And as we kind of move in that direction of, you know, nicer weather ahead and a vaccine and kind of moving in towards putting this in the rearview mirror, there's no reason, to put those barriers back in place. So I'm hoping that on the other side of this, we do see kind of a revitalized, more accessible way of building communities together, so that everyone can kind of have a seat at the table. And that kind of old sort of perspective of like, well, we do this way because it's always been done this way. We can kind of let that phrase die, because I think it's time, I think it's time to be able to say, well, let's look at this, fresh eyes. That's what we've all had to do this year. So yeah. And it's just been such a pleasure to listen to all three of the other folks on the call and kind of hear their expertise. And I hope that, we can stay connected, and anyone on the call, feel free to reach out to me for sure. It's been just such a pleasure to get to listen to everyone today.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today and for sharing all of your wisdom and talent and passion with the group. It is always energizing for me to hear from our members and from the experts around the state, because you are who make ULI valuable to our community. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for shedding a little bit of light into your crystal balls for the future. And I look forward to seeing and working with all of you very soon. A quick reminder that we have next week coming up, the next sort of session or installment of this 3-week Emerging Trends in Real Estate event. We will be talking about the economy, the capital markets, and what the director of economics at PNC is predicting will be a K-shaped recovery. If you don't know what that is, tune in next week and find out. So thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, be well. I enjoyed every moment of this. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.